Hello and welcome to my workshop. So today we're going to take this Chevy Silverado body and we're going to be turning this into a dually. So we're going to make some extension fenders on the side and dropping the bed down. Alright, so let's get started. So I decided to cut out the wheel wells and use that piece on the actual mold for making the dually fenders. So I'm just taking a small pin saw here, and this is made by Alpha. It's a very thin blade. It is somewhat fragile and it has the potential to bend over, so you have to be really careful with it. But the kerf, or the amount of material that's removing, is extremely thin. When you're cutting this out, it actually works really well. It would probably fit within most of the body lines, say for like a hood or a door. So to save a little time, once I get both sides, I can just make a slice down the top and then you can bend it over just like a regular styrene piece. I'm not just adding dually fenders, I'm actually extending the length of the bed a bit just to kind of make this thing more realistic to what the actual dually truck would be. So I got pretty lucky here, and the thickness of the bed there was almost exactly 60 thousandths, so it's the same thickness of material I had to work with. So what I ended up doing is just putting a piece on both sides to support that added section in the middle, and once I get all that glued together, then you can come back with fillers, fill in the top, and that seam just kind of disappears. You can see I get the solvent glue to really hold the styrene down to this plastic, and I'm assuming it's an ABS. The CA glue, or the super glue, is there to kind of hold the thing in place, add a little bit of a backer, but mainly there to almost hold like a clamp until that solvent glue really has a chance to dry. So for the mold, I just ended up taking two pieces of MDF, gluing them together. And as I mentioned, I'm going to actually take the cutoff and use that for the outside portion of the mold there. So here I'm taking just a piece of styrene, tracing the shape or the contour of the body, and then copying that over onto the mold. And the idea is I want to get this mold to recess and fit snug up against the body before I do a vacuum pull. That way I know when I'm done I can just cut back to the mold, and then that piece will fit up against the body really nicely. So just taking a rotary tool and carefully cutting down to that line that I marked from those pieces of scrap styrene that trace the contour of the body. So once I have kind of the general shape worked out on the sander, I ended up just gluing that plastic right to the top. And I'm just using CA glue to hold it. Now there's going to be some gaps and voids where the plastic from the wood is, and I'm literally just going to fill that in with CA glue. Put some in to kind of get almost a dam or a barrier, and then I can just fill the whole thing up with CA glue. And that way it'll prevent the plastic from flexing any during the vacuum forming process. This is a two-part moldable epoxy. It sticks pretty good to the wood. It probably is not the best. It's really made for plastic, and it sticks really well to plastic. But if you press it in hard and kind of leave it alone while it's drying, it'll eventually kind of soak in. It kind of soaks into the wood almost, and it does hold pretty firm. But what I'm doing here is just pressing that in to the wood and doing a decent shape, molding it up to the plastic. I'm going to come back and sand this later, but I want to get it as close as possible. So basically that two-part epoxy is almost used like a transition between the wood and the plastic, and allows me to get a really nice good contour and a good shape for that dually fender. So you can see why I wanted to have that recessed cut out in the back. That way I can, hold this thing up to the body and see exactly what it's going to look like, get the exact profile, instead of having to worry about trying to cut that plastic to shape to the body, or it possibly not being wide enough or too wide. I can kind of get a much better look at it. So one of the things when I cut these out, I probably should have thought a little bit ahead, but I really just didn't think about it, is I cut straight up. And so basically what ends up is a small gap in the front and back where when that dually fender's rounded would be exposed. So it's not a big deal. I literally just cut me a piece of styrene, did a little cold forming, glued it into place, put a backer on it, and then there's only just a small amount of it that's even going to be exposed, and the rest of it will be glued to the fender, so it'll be nice and strong. So I just cut a piece of the back, and I didn't worry too much about the size when I glued this in, because once I put the fender on, I'm going to end up trimming that back almost to the fender anyway, so it doesn't really matter how much protrudes down and goes forward. One of the things I've been doing a lot lately is, especially for these little styrene strips, is using cutters instead of a razor knife. I think a little bit safer than trying to cut these pieces with a razor knife, and it's so quick if you get a really good quality pair of cutters to cut that stuff down to shape. They're just doing some of the final shaping and sanding. That body line that comes off of the fender, I'm just using a file to kind of round that shape over and give it that good transition into the body. Basically the body line will flow all the way down the whole truck. So when I added the material to the side, when I was lengthening the body up, I tried to make sure there was enough material protruding up, because there's almost a recessed body line that runs right at the top of the whole bed there. And so what I'm basically just doing is taking a rotary tool with I think it's a round ball on the end, and just carving in the section I need, and coming back with some sandpaper and files and such, and getting that down into shape. So here you can see the first vacuum form coming off the table. Basically just taking that thing and getting a little bit of sanding, a little bit of trimming to make sure that it fits up properly, making sure both sides are good and coated with the solvent, and give them a second to get soft a little bit, and basically put it up onto the truck. Now what I'm trying to do to hold it into place is I make sure the fender's in the right spot, add a little dab of super glue, hit the CA activator, and just keep working my way around, holding that piece down into the right position all the way around the fender until it's glued into place. Like I say, the CA glue holds it instantaneously, but the solvent is really what is the long term. So here you can see that process of adding that piece of plastic onto a piece of wood before I end up sanding it down. And so this is for the other side. And so I'm just kind of getting a little wall started and getting it filled in with CA glue. And then I'll end up coming back and sanding this thing down to look like the mirror image of the other side. So here I did a little bit different technique to cut away the material on the back. I just took the rotary tool with a small cutoff blade. I cut along the back and the side, and then come back with a razor knife and then some sandpaper and then shape that down. And I think that it probably end up being just about the same, but there's a whole lot less sawdust this way because you're just basically cutting 2 lines with a rotary tool versus sanding literally all that material away. And so, once I get that outer, that basic shape there I want, then I'm just going to transfer the lines over from the other one with some marker and start working on forming that down so that it looks like, the mirror copy. And again, like the final step is that 2-part epoxy, just so I can have that good transition between that plastic and the wood. Another little trick I do for the MDFs especially is I apply a very thin layer of CA. So that MDF is almost like a sponge. It really just soaks that up really well. When you put the CA glue on there, it will prevent it from deteriorating when you're cutting the molds out and make your molds last a little bit longer. So the last step here is to use a dolphin glaze, and that is a 2-part filler. It's kind of like what you would have for Bondo, but it's a much thinner version and it self-levels. It also has a lot fewer bubbles than you do with your Bondo. You'll notice when you fill that up and you get it sanded down, you'll see all these little pits. This is going to level out. It's going to be really smooth, and just in a matter of minutes you can come back and sand this thing down, and it is just perfectly glass smooth all the way across. It's a little expensive, but for the amount you use, I think it's well worth the expense. It was a little short project. It was a lot of fun to build these fenders here, and I'm glad to get this thing done. A lot of other fun things coming up. Until then, we'll see you on the rocks.